Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Dennis Prager Show, and I go straight to my guest who needs no introduction to 97.4% of you. For the other 2.6, Hugh Hewitt is a nationally syndicated talk show host on most of the stations I am on. And he is, as well, a lawyer, law professor, syndicated columnist. He is, I hate to say it, but a very good guy. I hate to say it because of all of the awful things he has done to me, but nevertheless, I forgive him. He has come out with a very important book, and that is The Queen, The Epic Ambition of Hillary and the Coming of a Second Clinton Era. Hugh Hewitt, welcome to the Dennis Prager Show.
Dennis Prager, good morning, my friend. How are you?
I am very well, thank you, sir. Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager. I'm speaking with Hugh Hewitt, my colleague, who has written The Queen, The Epic Ambition of Hillary and the Coming of a Second Clinton Era. As, of course, you know, William Safire, who was not a flamethrower, was not particularly right-wing. He was a conservative, but not right-wing, one might say. Columnist of the New York Times for many years. Unbelievably, given how reticent he was in describing political people, said that she's a pathological liar. What prompted that, and how do you assess it?
Well, William Safire is a genius, the late William Safire. I stood with him. I only met him once on the third hole at Richard Nixon's Casa Pacifica golf course in 1979 at a party for astronauts. And whatever William Safire said was usually 100% on. And I believe pathological may be one of his wrong errors. She is a strategic liar, meaning that she lies when it's necessary. In the release of the emails yesterday, Dennis, there was one particularly revealing exchange between her and Cheryl Mills on the nomination of one Goodwin Liu, who's now an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of our state of California. He was turned down by the United States Senate for a lifetime appointment on the Ninth Circuit. Hillary backed him, and she got talking points for two phone calls, one with the White House counsel, Greg Craig, who was a lefty, and one with Dianne Feinstein, who was slightly lefty. So Secretary of State Clinton called Dianne Feinstein to tell her that Goodwin Liu was more moderate than she thought because she was afraid that Goodwin Liu was too liberal. And then she called Greg Craig to tell him that Goodwin Liu was more lefty than he thought because he wanted a more liberal judge. That's Hillary. She is strategically flexible when it comes to the truth.
Well, in other words, you would just drop the word pathological. Would you keep the word liar? That's what counts.
Yes, a strategic liar.
You see,
she will say
that's well. It's important though. It's like if somebody has taken a stapler from work, I wouldn't call them a thief. If somebody lied on rare occasion, I wouldn't call them a liar. To say that someone is a liar is to say that this is habitual, and it's a very important point if you're thinking of somebody as President of the United States. So are you saying she's a liar, whether strategic or non-strategic?
I am, but I am saying the Queen, the book I wrote, is based on The Prince, which was written 500 years ago this year, give or take a few months. And in it, Machiavelli advises Lorenzo di Medici that the truth is not your ally. You have to do what is necessary to maintain power. And it is better to be feared than loved, and the ends justify the means. And so she is very much a Machiavel. And you and I are not, right? We believe in the natural law. We believe in a higher law. And there are some things we would not say in order to advance our political interests. But I don't know that there isn't anything that Mrs. Clinton wouldn't say to advance her political interests. That's what the book's about.
So what does it say then? If you're right, what does that say? This is the depressing part for me. What does that say about half of our fellow Americans who are crazy about her?
Well, I don't think half are. I think a good 25% are. But about those 25%, they love power. Well, you know the left. They love power more than truth.
Correct. But they love her in particular.
She is an agency of their ascendancy. And so that's the essence of her appeal. She's a dreadful candidate, and I write this in The Queen. She had a catastrophic tenure at state, and I chronicle that. I have one section in my book, Part 4, where I reproduce the transcripts. I asked serially men and women of the mainstream media, whether it's Nicholas Kristof, who's been your guest, whether it's Maggie Haberman of the New York Times, whether it's Jay Tapper or Chuck Todd, I asked, what did she accomplish at state? And they're all befuddled. No one can say anything. She didn't accomplish anything. She did great harm to the United States. But that realization, in silence more often than expressed, doesn't move them. They want her to win. Not Jake, but the others.
Right. I have asked that question of people on the left. What has she accomplished? And then they say, well, this woman is the Secretary of State of the United States, senator from the state of New York. So I say what she was or is not the same as what she accomplished.
Right.
They never answer that part.
It's like saying, what does Dennis Prager stand for on the radio? And that would be the answer. He's on 15 hours a week. He's been on longer on radio than anybody else in America. He's had more hours of radio. But what does he stand for? Well, he's been on longer.
That's right. It would be exactly the same. That's right. So I go back to this issue now of her popularity and the fact that she is female. So what does it say about my fellow Americans who are just thrilled that she is female? What's that about?
There is a legitimate aspiration among women that we would produce our own Thatcher or our own Indira Gandhi or, more importantly, our own Golda Meir. There is that desire to say we are the equal of any man in that office, and she is the agent of that ambition. And it's not a bad ambition. It's a good ambition for young women to believe that they can be everything any young man can be, and you and I both believe that. She's the flawed instrument of their ambition, and a deeply flawed instrument of their ambition.
But Carly Fiorina is not an instrument of their ambition.
She's becoming one on our side of the aisle, on the conservative side. That's what I saw in Denver, and her abilities, revealed fully now for people outside of deep blue California, are impressive. And I tell my friends, the reason Carly Fiorina is ascending is she's used to doing quarterly earnings calls with analysts who are the meanest journalists in the world, right? They throw things at you. They try and destroy your company. They ask about the bottom line. Carly can handle any journalist because she's handled quarterly earnings calls for when she was head of HP. She's very good, and that's why her star is ascending, because young women in our party and many young men say, wow, there's a brawler. There's someone who can get in and combat Hillary, and will go right at her. And I think that's what fueled Newt Gingrich and which held back Mitt Romney. The combativeness of Newt in 2012 appealed to some people till he became unpredictable. Mitt Romney never embraced his inner wrestler, right? He's too nice of a man, really, to go up against the Democratic machine and triumph. And you've got to be cutthroat. I mean, you've got to be like, did you ever read Patrick O'Brien's novel, Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin?
I'm bad on novels, don't ask me.
All right. Well, they were brawlers. They were great men, but when combat arose, they won. And that's what we need in our candidate, is someone who will engage the Clinton machine every day, 24/7, like Patton engaged.
That's right. And more than that, which I'll talk about when we come back. I'm speaking to Hugh Hewitt and his obviously readable and important book, because he has great insights into the political arena. The Queen by Hugh Hewitt, up at DennisPrager.com, available everywhere. Hi, everybody. The book is The Queen, The Epic Ambition of Hillary Clinton. He doesn't have the word Clinton. I'm paraphrasing, but the actual subtitle is The Epic Ambition of Hillary and the Coming of a Second Clinton Era. Hugh Hewitt is the author. And let's go to what makes her tick. And I generally am not a fan of psychohistory, but when you're running for president, people would like to know you better. Do you have a sense of what makes her tick?
The familia. They are a family operation. And in The Queen, I lay out the platform on which she's going to run. And I predict, and I'm pretty certain about this, that if she is president, when the first Supreme Court vacancy arises, she will appoint Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York, an experienced prosecutor, 49 years old, creating a vacancy in the United States Senate, which will be filled, as it once was by Hillary, by Chelsea Clinton, in an attempt to continue the family business. It's a familia thing, and that's all it is.
God, is it frightening? It's so. I hate to say it, but so un-American.
It's a dynasty is not American, but we are. You know, when the Roman Republic moved into the Roman Empire, they went from a republic to a familia, and that's what we're looking at with the Clintons. By the way, I have to say, this morning our friend Captain Mark was at the Navy Yard when again it was shut down for fear of a terrorist attack. I've been in contact with him. He's safe. There was no shooting, actually. But, we had dinner recently at the home of my law partner, Robert O'Brien, with Mark. And it's chilling the world that we live in, and yet the candidates that the left throws up appear to have no appreciation for the world in which we live in.
What are you referring to specifically?
This morning at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., there was another terrorist.
Right, I know, which was a false alarm.
Right, a false alarm. I do not believe that the left takes seriously the threat from either Iran or the Islamic State. They are so concerned with power in the United States, they close their eyes to it. Thus, the president's almost maniacal intention to get a deal with the radical mullahs while ignoring the metastasizing threat from the Islamic State. I had Mike Pompeo on my show yesterday, member of the House Intel Committee, saying that the threat stream pointing to July 4th is very alarming to anyone in the Congress who reads the intelligence briefings. You don't hear that from the president. You don't hear it from Mrs. Clinton. You don't hear it from the left. They'd rather carry on and spend money and entrench themselves than deal with the world as it is.
Well, the denial of reality is a fundamental aspect of the left. The denial that Nidal Hassan was an Islamic terrorist. It's still regarded as a workplace shooting. Right,
and the denial that the Castro brothers remain ruthless communist dictators who have imprisoned millions and continue to oppress millions in their island prison. And the president opens lawlessly reopens an embassy in Havana yesterday. They'd rather make peace with the Castro. And as Ted Cruz said on my show yesterday, what a tragedy that the United States has an embassy in Havana before we have one in Jerusalem.
I heard that. I was listening to your show, and I heard that. I thought it was a very powerful statement. I thought he came across very articulately on your show.
Well, there's no better constitutional scholar who has run for the president since William Howard Taft. And Ted Cruz didn't win 9 Supreme Court arguments because he's lucky. He's a brilliant man and quite a storyteller, and has the only ability, as I write in the book, I chart for Hillary the 16 Republicans who are running against her and their strengths and their weaknesses, and I advise her in this book. It's all advice for Hillary that if Ted Cruz is the nominee, she should simply refuse to debate him. She'll take her apart muscle and joint. He'll carve her up like no one else we have, because he was a champion debater at Princeton, and he retains all the skill set of a Supreme Court advocate of unparalleled ability.
Did I hear you say she won't debate him?
My advice to her is not to.
Yeah, but you can't do that in for running for president.
Nixon did it to McGovern in 1972. He simply refused.
Wow. So you think she could get away with it?
Yeah, the media will say, yeah, Ted Cruz is a radical. She shouldn't debate him. They'll applaud her for being ruthless.
Wow. All right, everybody, we continue. My guest, Hugh Hewitt, his book, The Queen. It's about Hillary Clinton, and it's important reading. We shall return in a moment on the Dennis Prager Show. Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here. The Queen just come out. The book. It's a play on The Prince by Machiavelli. The epic ambition of Hillary and the coming of a second Clinton era. Hugh Hewitt, my colleague, is the author. Hugh, people don't like to talk about this, and I don't either, and almost never do. Maybe the word never doesn't even need almost. I don't recall having done it, but I'll say almost. Nevertheless, the woman is running for president of the United States, and we always have thought of people as sort of models, not of perfection, but of their way of living their lives. And many families have undergone problems of infidelity. I have no comment on that. I have no judgment on that. That's not the issue. But it's clear to everybody that they don't have a marriage other than a political union. They don't seem to live together. It is pretty well known that he is with a lot of different women, unless I'm mistaken. Is this an issue or not?
It's not an issue, and like you, I don't talk about it. I don't know the facts. I do know that when I watch The Sopranos, and I don't know if you watch The Sopranos, the marriage between the Sopranos reminds me of this marriage. Conflicted, full of angst and emotion, bound by love of children, which is genuine, bound by shared ambition and goals, and a partnership. It's the reality of the Clinton machine, is that within that machine, there's a vast network of people whose loyalty extend to the former president and the would-be future president. And that machine is pretty doggone loyal for reasons not unlike those that bind together the families. And so I go back to that repeatedly in The Queen, and I think it explains everything, which is self-interest trumps all, right? And it's in the self-interest of both Clintons to be a partnership. And I don't know their level of love, and I don't doubt that there is some love there. They both deeply love Chelsea. I think that is obvious. And they both have self-interest at work here. And that's not exactly unusual in history, right? We've seen that over and over again. It's probably not unusual on both sides of the aisle where there are those partnerships that endure despite the ordinary domestic travails that would otherwise rip some marriages asunder. But I also believe in the unique fact that they are political before they're anything else. And that's because they came out of Georgetown and Wellesley in the 60s, in the early 70s, and they went to Yale Law School like our friend Michael in a period of time when it radicalized people and taught them. I reproduce, because I think it's very important, in the first pages of The Queen, a letter that Hillary sent to Saul Alinsky. It doesn't tell us much about what she believes now, but it tells us a lot about when she was 22. And you and I both know when you're 22, you're pretty fully formed ideologically. You might alter and evolve, but you're very fully formed ideologically. Were you?
Yes.
22?
Yep.
And so I don't think you change that much. You adapt and you evolve to meet changing circumstances, but you don't change that hardcore. And that I put that letter in there as it was exactly sent by her to Saul Alinsky at the age of 22. And I recommend everyone read that. Even if they don't buy The Queen, pick it up and read that letter. Read the opening letter, which mirrors the one that Machiavelli sent to Lorenzo Medici when he provided him the prince 500 years ago. I adopt the voice and the technique because I found it a useful way to really try and communicate to people what they are about and how they view the world. And I'm being condemned on the right for helping her too much by providing her a platform. I ghostwrite some speeches for her, and I put them in the book. And I tell her how to handle each of the would-be Republican nominees, because forewarned is forearmed. And it's necessary to know your opponent and how they think in order to beat your opponent.
So if I had to analyze Barack Obama, I would say he is ideological first, and power is a means to implementing his ideology. With regard to the Clintons, I believe power is first, and then you can do whatever you want ideologically, but they love power more than they even love ideology.
You're exactly right. 100,000% correct. I can't say more perfectly correct. That's in fact, the perfect comparison, and that's why the Obamas and the Clintons do not like each other. In the very famous book Game Change, Mark Halperin quotes Bill Clinton in a rage about why Obama was beating them, saying that, quote, he's an off-the-rack Chicago Paul. How can he be beating us? And they underestimated the incredible undertow of ideology on young people.
Right, which is not the case here, even though they were radicalized. What matters is a love of power. I so don't relate to it that I can only say that my only reaction is one of contempt. I don't understand it. I don't relate to it. It strikes me as as a profound vacuum that needs to be validated by love and power among the masses?
I think it's called Caesarism, and it appears in history repeatedly, from the Caesars through Napoleon. The great American who resisted it was George Washington, who could have been a Caesar, an American Caesar, and he turned it down. The Clintons love power. People, they love the jets. They love the White House. They're addicted. They have to get back to the White House.
That's a good word, addicted. That's right. I think they are addicted.
So that explains everything. By the way, Dennis, can I ask you a question? You boycotted me for years from Prager University, and I've decided that now I have the perfect 5-minute. I want to do a 5-minute Prager University on understanding Dennis Prager.
That is hilarious.
That's my calling.
I think, though, if I had you do that, I would be charged with Caesarism.
No, but I suggested it. So it can't be Caesarism. Either. I just want to do that. I think it'll be the introduction to Prager University and explain why people need to go there. By the way, did you read the Ten Commandments for your audiobook?
No.
Oh, that you should go back. I read The Queen for the audiobook. It's very hard to do.
That's why I don't do it. It's unbelievably hard to do. We'll be back in a moment. I want everyone to know about his book, The Queen.
Blue moon in my eyes, so help me now. I got a blue moon in my eyes. Do you want
I am going to do a happiness hour and many other hours just on a statement Hugh Hewitt made about the Clintons being addicted to power and influence and luxury, etc. The number of things that people could be addicted to outside of drugs, alcohol, drugs and alcohol, or gambling, is very large. I think fame. I think free money is an addiction. It's a very important thing that people don't realize. It's very easy to become enslaved. That's why I wrote the Ten Commandments, because that gets you unenslaved if you live by that. The book that Hugh Hewitt wrote, and is very important, is The Queen, The Epic Ambition of Hillary and the Coming of a Second Clinton Era. So let me ask you, because we're running out of time, which is always painful. Let me ask you this. When she said to the father of the Navy SEAL murdered in Benghazi, we're going to get those movie makers, did she know she was lying to him?
Yes.
Wow.
And I know that on very good authority from one of the victims of that attack. You know, Dennis, you just said something. Alexander Hamilton, who's one of my heroes, wrote that fame is the highest ambition of the noblest minds. It can also be the lowest ambition of the most desperate people, right? But fame is not a bad thing
if it's a tool. No, it's a bad thing to aspire to. It's not. It's a good thing to use for good, but to aspire to it as an end in itself is terrible. But anyway, go on.
Well, Hamilton.
Tell me, poor Hamilton's getting bumped off the $10 bill.
I know, that's terrible.
Which is a bad thing, by the way. But tell me, she lied to the father. She knew it.
Yes. Because it's, in fact, impossible for anyone to say other. That is why they have redacted the email exchange between the president and the Secretary of State from that night. That is why we do not know. She went home at 1 a.m., and I write this in the book. Her biggest vulnerability as Benghazi was under attack, as the CIA annex came under the second attack, as Tripoli was being evacuated, she talked to Greg Hicks earlier in the evening, who had then become, the ambassador was dead, he was in charge. She never called him back. In fact, she left the State Department at 1 in the morning with her ambassador dead and her men and women under attack. What leader does that? And I believe she came to the conclusion, either she was sent home because she broke, that's very possible, or she knew that she had to flee the scene of an unfolding political disaster. That is not leadership. What leader ever leaves the battle?
That's why you got to read the book, my friends. The Queen, Hugh Hewitt. As much as difficult it is to say, I really love you.
Thank you, Dennis. It's reciprocal.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dennis Prager Show. I have in studio, I didn't even expect this. I thought I would be talking to him and he would be in Jerusalem. But he is on a book tour in the United States, and that's excellent because I always like having an author in studio. And this is probably, I would say, one of the 5 most important books written about the Middle East and the United States ever written, and certainly the most important of the contemporary era. It is written by the former ambassador of Israel to the United States, Michael Oren, and it is titled Ally. It's a good title, Ally. My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide. The tension between the United States and Israel is the greatest that I have witnessed in my lifetime, and the ambassador of Israel to the United States, who has seen and experienced this tension, is with me, and he has written about this very openly and about the American-Israeli relationship. I am a big believer that George Gilder is right in the Israel test, that it is the way of assessing a person's moral compass. Could you play, I'd like to play the very first moments of George Gilder on the Israel test, a book that he wrote. George Gilder, for your information, is not Jewish because it shouldn't have to be said, but it's probably relevant. And he says it at the end. It's a Prager University course, and it's just based on his terrific book, The Israel Test. I am a big believer in this very notion, which I recently discussed. Here is George Gilder at the opening of his course at Prager University.
How do you respond to people who excel you in invention, creativity, and wealth? Do you envy them? Do you feel their success somehow diminishes you? Or do you admire what they've achieved and try to emulate it?
That's it.
That's
it. Those are the questions. These are the determinative issues, and that is, I am convinced, a major part of the reason for Israel hatred, and for that matter, Jew hatred and American hatred. Anyway, this extremely thoughtful man, because he's a historian prior to being a diplomat, Michael Oren. Michael Oren, welcome to the Dennis Prager Show.
Dennis, I can't believe I'm actually in your studio. We have talked so many times in the past.
Right.
Usually I've been a soldier in Lebanon or a soldier in Gaza. Someone's usually shooting at me when I'm talking to you. And here I am sitting in your studio. Nobody's shooting at me. This is wonderful.
Well, knock wood.
It's early in the day.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, you never know what'll happen. Right. Well, you have written here. I have started it. I am going to finish every word of it, and I don't say that all the time, as my listeners know. It's not possible. I can't read every book of every author I have on, although there are many important books, and I wish I could. I wish we could implant books into our brain.
Lovely.
They would be lovely. All right, so I ask every author, virtually every author who's written something significant, I open with the same question. Why did you write the book?
Well, that is a huge question. It's a question I asked myself even while I was writing the book. Keep in mind, as you said, I had been an historian. I had never written a book in the first person before. Never said, I thought this, I did this. So that was a huge transformation for me and a big challenge. Then the next challenge is I'm writing about an intimate relationship and conversations between officials. And how do you begin to approach that question? Fortunately, I had some help. I had this book was reviewed by no less than 7 Israeli agencies, twice by the Israel Defense Forces, twice by the Defense Ministry, and once by the Mossad, in addition to other agencies. So I had some help with what I could say and what I couldn't say. I could say, as it turned out, an awful lot. They took out very little, Dennis, you should know. And then I had to make a case. I had to make a case that the U.S.-Israel alliance is vital not just for the United States and Israel. It's vital for what remains of Middle East stability. It is crucial for the world because the whole world looks at this relationship as a litmus of America's dependability, of Israel's strength, and it has ramifications that are global.
Yeah, well, I agree with that entirely. Let's talk about the book. Let's talk about the Middle East right now. Do you believe that the Prime Minister of Israel made a terrible mistake? And I'm not leading you on. I have a position, but it is not necessarily what the question implies. But your Prime Minister has been terribly attacked, or greatly attacked, for saying during the election campaign that he can't see the establishment of a Palestinian state at this time. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that comment?
Well, in basic, I agree with it, by the way. I don't think anybody can see a Palestinian state at the time. For the record, President Obama said he can't see a Palestinian state at this time. Now, keep in mind, look at where the Middle East is now. Syria, Iraq no longer exist. There isn't a Syria. There isn't an Iraq. If we were to create a Palestinian state tomorrow, it would have no national institutions. It would have no economy. It would have a corrupt, unelected leadership. People don't widely know in this country that last summer, during Protective Operation, Hamas tried to kill Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. And they would have killed Mahmoud Abbas if not for the Israel Defense Forces. We saved him. And what if the Israel Defense Forces were to pull out of the West Bank and leave Mahmoud Abbas to his own devices? He wouldn't survive a week. And this Palestinian state, even if it were created, would fall to Hamas at best, ISIS at worst, very quickly. Now, should Israel always say that it's in favor of a two-state solution? I think we should, as a matter of diplomacy, even though there's nobody is going to negotiate with it now. Mahmoud Abbas is busy declaring a Palestinian state unilaterally in the UN and trying to declare us war criminals in the International Criminal Court. But we should say it. We should always be there. I believe we should be very careful where we build and where we do not build in the West Bank. Jerusalem is a different category. We can build wherever we want in Jerusalem. But so the Prime Minister didn't say he was against the two-state solution, to be fair to him. And by the way, I'm not in his party. I'm in government now. I'm not in his party. I'm not his spokesman anymore. But I will say, if you look at what he said, given the state of the Middle East today, it is really difficult to see a situation where we would have a two-state solution today.
Given that's what I felt. I didn't understand the attacks. They didn't seem to be morally or intellectually honest. At this time, with the Arab world in the chaos that it is in, why would anybody want to see a withdrawal of Israel from territory that is now stable? Wouldn't it be immediate instability and terror-based?
Yeah, there were terrible terrorist attacks around the Middle East this week. In Tunisia, now in Egypt. There's one little pocket of stability. It's Israel and the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. And to have an Israeli military pullout right now is to create a vacuum that will fill up almost instantly with
I have
jihadist
to believe
forces.
Jordan would be frightened beyond words.
Jordan would probably implode.
Yeah.
It would be caught between Iraq, which doesn't exist anymore, ISIS on one side, and ISIS is now infiltrating Gaza at an enormous rate.
Yeah.
I'm in Knesset. I'm in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee.
I should have
We're briefed
mentioned
on
that,
this.
by the way. Ambassador Oren is now a member of the Israeli parliament, and he is not in the party of the Prime Minister of Israel.
So I am in the government. We are in the coalition,
Right.
and as a member of the Defense Committee, we're regularly briefed. And we are tracking the degree to which ISIS has penetrated Gaza. How quickly would ISIS penetrate the West Bank if Israeli forces were not there?
Yes, exactly.
Instantaneously.
All right, let's get to the most sensitive question of all, and there'll be a break in the middle for reasons that keep the show alive, namely commercial breaks,
Please.
Which make talk radio possible. I always tell that to people who are somewhat tired of commercials. If it weren't for them, you would have national radio in the United States, and if you like that, there is one. It's called NPR. So I'd just like to periodically remind people, thank God for sponsors who make this possible. Anyway, the question is, there are many people who believe that the President of the United States is not a friend of Israel's. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think, and I say repeatedly in the text that President Obama is not anti-Israel. He is in favor of a certain type of Israel. He himself has said that the Israel he admires was the pre-67 Israel, the Israel of Moshe Dayan. I think it's largely a mythic Israel. If you ask me, and I'll say this very emphatically, Israel today is much more open and much more democratic than it was before 1967. In many ways more liberal than it was before 1967. But that is the image that the president has and he admires, and he said this repeatedly openly. We don't conform to that image today. And that is part of the problem, but there's a broader context, and that is the president came into the White House in 2009 with a worldview. And that world would have been a challenge for any Israeli government, not just the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. It's a worldview that puts tremendous emphasis on cooperation with the UN, not a particularly friendly organization. Its outreach to the Muslim world, including some elements in the Muslim world who aren't too friendly to Israel, the Muslim Brotherhood, Erdogan.
All right,
Turkey.
continue on the point when we come back, because I need to tell everybody about one of the most important books of the recent past. Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide, Michael Oren, O-R-E-N, most recent ambassador of Israel to the United States, now a member of the Israeli parliament. The book is up at DennisPrager.com. We will return in a moment. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I am speaking with the former ambassador of Israel to the United States and his major book, because it's honest. The book is titled Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide. It's a little sad that you even have that subtitle, American-Israeli Divide, and I want to talk about that, obviously. But let's get back to President Obama. His worldview is the issue, not personal animosity. Is that a fair way of summarizing what you're saying?
I think you cannot say that the relationship between Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu is the same relationship that, say, Bill Clinton had with Yitzhak Rabin or that George Bush had with Arik Sharon. It's not a love story, Dennis. But I don't think that's the whole of it. I think it starts with a worldview. I spent a lot of time studying that worldview. I gave myself a course that I called Obama 101. I took my skills as an historian and I applied them to trying to figure out who this person was. It was 2009 when he wasn't very well known. And I looked at everything he wrote, every speech he gave, and particularly his memoirs, which were particularly his earliest memoirs, Dreams from My Father, which he wrote before he was thinking of running for president. So it's a rather candid glimpse into his soul. And I made several conclusions, not just about Israel, but the way the world looked through his eyes. And this was a person who, again, we said before the break, had a collegial approach to world affairs. America wasn't going to be the policeman anymore. A lot of cooperation with UN agencies, anti-colonialism, tremendous sympathy for the Palestinian cause, a desire to reach out and reconcile with Iran. It's there right from the beginning. And an interesting recoiling from military power. One of the most revealing lines the president ever said was spoken at a non-proliferation conference in 2010. I have this line emblazoned on my soul, and you'll know why. He said, "Whether we like it or not, the United States is the world's leading military superpower." Now think about what that line says. Would John Kennedy have spoken that line? Would Bill Clinton have spoken that line? Many people, particularly in my country, wake up and say a little prayer that the world's leading military power is also the world's leading democracy, because it wasn't always the case in history. Mm-hmm. But there is a reticence there. There's a reluctance, a recoiling from that status. Now, that's for an Israeli ambassador, as controversial as this could be, this was my duty. I had to understand the challenges, some opportunities presented by this administration, and see to the degree to which Israel could or could not adapt.
I have said to my listeners for 6 years, because a lot of people think that the president is animated by all sorts of ideas or even by Islam. And I have said, folks, what explains Barack Obama politically, philosophically, is that he is a man of the left. Everything that you have just said corroborates my theory.
Whenever I had a question about where the administration was going, and this is, by the way, one of the most central, if not probably the most centralized administration in post-World War II American history, meaning that decisions are made pretty much within the Oval Office. Whenever I had a question where I didn't quite understand where the administration was going, I didn't go to the strategy. I always went to the ideology. Mm-hmm. And the ideology was a good guide. Yes. And I agree with you, Dennis.
Okay, good. Well, that's very well. I may have spoken over those words. I agree with you, Dennis. I just want my listeners to the man who was at the vortex of American-Israeli relations. What years were you ambassador?
2009 to the end of 2013. Over 4.5 years.
Yes. All right. So the man at the vortex of that relationship agrees. That's the issue, folks. And people want to deny it. Both his defenders and his opponents want to deny that is the issue. It is not Barack Obama per se. It is the humanus leftus that is in the White House.
When Israelis ask me, are things going to change in 2016? And there's obviously going to be a different president, but we're still going to be left with the left, as you said, which has a very important voice in this country, and in many cases is a growing voice in this country, and Israel has to acknowledge that. One of the problems we do face is that our leaders, many of them are American educated, but they were educated in a very different America. And one of the harder jobs I had as ambassador was to go back to Jerusalem and say, guys, the America you remember from the 70s and the 80s has changed an awful lot. And as much as Barack Obama is the architect of change, he is the product of the change.
Yes.
And it's also why I thought we would have an 8-term presidency under Barack Obama.
Well, you were right.
8-year president.
Yes, yeah, you were right. So, have you dealt with Hillary Clinton?
Extensively.
And any thoughts?
Formidable, very smart, physically strong. She would also go on seven nation tours and arrive in Jerusalem and negotiate for 10 hours straight. Strong, but keep in mind she is from a part of she's a member of the Democratic Party, and is a liberal. I think she's a self-described liberal. I'm not doing her a disservice by saying this. And should she win in 2016, that will have ramifications for Israeli policy, in which Israel will have to either adapt to or not adapt to, but understand non-adoption to that policy will have an outcome, will have a ramification.
I debated at the Oxford Forum last November, and my opponents, there were 2 against 2. My opponents were interestingly an Israeli expatriate, Avi Shleim, a professor.
I know quite well.
Well, that would be an interesting subject unto itself, but as interesting as it is, I won't veer there right now. And his partner was a PhD. She received her PhD under him, an Iranian-American woman from Berkeley. And she said, and this is on YouTube, you can see it, to hundreds of Oxford students present, she said, Israel treats the Palestinians the way the Nazis treated the Jews. And she got an ovation for that. How do you explain this spectacular lie getting an ovation at Oxford?
Well, first, before I explain it, let me say that when I go and speak at universities, and I as ambassador, I tried to get to at least 2 campuses every month, and I would usually choose those campuses that were the most hostile. There are 7,000 campuses in the United States. Sometimes you walk in as an Israeli, you get a standing ovation.
6,000 of them were tied for first among hostile to Israel.
I draw a red line. I'm willing to take almost every question from an audience, and some of them are quite crazy. The one question I am unwilling to answer is that question. The question is, Israel treats Palestinians the way the Nazis treated the Jews, and that sets me off because I don't see Israel lining up 6 million Palestinians and putting them in gas chambers. That to me is beyond the red line for me. Why did it get an ovation in England? Because students want to believe this. I think it hooks into some deep-seated historical animosity toward Jews, which is coming increasingly conflated with Zionism. I think that the Palestinian cause in Europe particularly and in England especially has gone beyond of all rationale. And I know that department very well, Avi Shleim's department. I've worked with it. And that is an idea that is widely accepted there.
All right. Michael Oren, O-R-E-N, the last ambassador of Israel to the United States, the most recent, I should say. The book is Ally, and it is up at the DennisPrager.com website. We continue. Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here. My guest is Michael Oren, the last ambassador of Israel. It's funny, whenever I say the last, in English it's a problem. Last is previous and end. God forbid end. Anyway, the previous ambassador during much of the Obama era, and he has written about this very honestly, and it's become a national bestseller immediately. Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide. Let's talk about the subtitle because it's a painful one. Who would have imagined 15 years ago, let alone 30? I was a kid, and really kid. I was like 10. And I remember the way Israel was venerated in the United States. It was, Life magazine on the 13th anniversary of Israel had Israel's bar mitzvah. And during the 6-Day War, people would get on and actually say "we" when referring to Israeli military movements. Mm-hmm. What's happened?
I actually had in my office in Washington at the embassy, I kept a copy of the Life magazine 1973 edition of the 25th anniversary of Israel's creation. Israel was portrayed as a miracle, as a bastion of democracy and freedom. The word Palestinian does not appear anywhere in that magazine.
That's fascinating.
Only once to refer to pre-1948 Jews in Palestine.
Right.
They were the Palestinians.
Right.
1973. It's not ancient history. What happened? It changed. The image of Israel changed. Israel, in fact, is much more democratic today, much more liberal today. We just had the largest gay pride parade in Asia last week, and in Israel that wouldn't have happened before 1967. Certainly, something changed. The image changed, and the narrative in the press changed. But this is another subject. Israel has to cope with this reality. It is very difficult. And one of the basic problems we face with the press, you're not going to believe this, is very simply ratings. Ratings. Not all journalists wake up in the morning and hate Israel and think how we're going to make Israel look bad. But Israel brings headlines. And I saw it again and again, both as an officer in the IDF dealing with the press, and then as ambassador. We would have the Hamas would put out fake photographs of Palestinian dead. They'd take pictures from zombie movies and say these bodies were dismembered by Israeli soldiers, and mainstream American media would take them and reprint them because it got them headlines, and people aren't reading enough newspapers here. And I know some of these journalists were rather pro-Israel, but they needed to make a living. We have to deal with that reality, and then one of the jobs I have in Knesset is deepening this awareness within Israel that we can't afford to ignore this threat, because it's not a PR problem, Dennis. It's a strategic threat. We are up against Hamas and Hezbollah. They know they can't destroy us with the rockets. They know they can't destroy us with the tunnels. How can they destroy us? They can create an international situation where we can't defend ourselves, where our planes can't take off, our tanks can't roll forward, and they can keep shooting rockets at us until we die.
That's their strategy.
It's what I call it's a military tactic that serves a media and diplomatic strategy. And they want to get to the point where we are totally delegitimized, and then they can knock us off. They can knock us off with 100,000 rockets in the hands of Hezbollah.
Let me go to the personal for a moment. What was it like to be in the White House when Benjamin Netanyahu and Barack Obama were talking to one another?
Well, strangely enough, they had a rather cordial relationship. Sometimes it was funny. Sometimes it went on for hours. I was not present in any strong disagreements. I'd heard about disagreements. There's always a part of a conversation between a president and prime minister that takes place one-on-one, or as they say in Hebrew, four eyes. All right, mm-hmm. Four-eyed conversation, which makes you wonder whether Diane had three-eyed conversations.
That's right.
But
the other one eye.
But you don't know what. And I would hear sometimes we get a briefing about or a readout what would happen behind closed doors, and sometimes that would have a different tone to it. The big disagreements were very public, whether Israel was snubbed at the White House. What I talk about in the book is the decision made by the administration. This was an accident. Decision to dispense with two of the key components in the U.S.-Israel relationship as we had known it since the middle Reagan years, certainly since the middle 80s. And these two components were no surprises and no daylight. No surprises means if the United States is going to make a major pronouncement on Middle Eastern affairs that impacts Israel's security, Israel's going to get a chance to look at that text before it does that. That's what Bush did with Arik Sharon in 2002.
All right, give us the other one in a moment, because I want everybody to know the book, Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide, Michael Oren, up at my website. Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here with the last ambassador of Israel to the United States, Michael Oren, O-R-E-N, and his major work, Ally, a national bestseller. The subtitle, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide. He has been the ambassador through most of the Obama years, the Israeli ambassador to the United States. So I asked you, how did this happen? How did we get a divide between two countries that basically are in love, had been in love with each other? So you would mention that there were two sort of promises made, or two
pillars of it.
Fair enough.
We always had disagreements. We had disagreements about settlements. We had disagreements about Jerusalem. Some of them went back to Lyndon Johnson. Some of them went back to Harry Truman. Harry Truman put the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv, not in Jerusalem. And the non-recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital goes back to 1948. But the question is, how do we handle the divides? So we had no surprises. If America was going to make a major pronouncement on policy, Israel's going to get a chance in advance to look at it. In June 2009, President Obama went to Cairo. He didn't stop in Israel. He gave a speech that was twice as long as the first inaugural address, and it touched on many issues that impacted Israel's vital security. The Palestinian issue, but above all, he became the first president to publicly declare that Iran had the right to peaceful nuclear energy. This is in Iran that is the world's largest state sponsor of terror, and which pretty much on a weekly basis called for Israel's destruction. So these were very big pronouncements, important for us, but we never got a look at the draft before he gave the speech, so we were surprised. No daylight. Daylight means we can have our differences over Jerusalem, but we don't have them publicly. We have them behind closed doors because our enemies will see that we are divided, and our enemies will insinuate themselves between us and exploit our differences. The administration made a very purposeful decision at the outset. The first meeting between Netanyahu and Obama was in May of 2009. I was there. They've had 12 meetings, and I've been at all of them. He and the president surprised the prime minister. He said, "I demand an absolute freeze in settlement construction, both in the West Bank and in Jerusalem," which, by the way, no Israeli prime minister can do because Jerusalem is sovereign Israeli territory. An Israeli prime minister can no more freeze in Jerusalem than the president of the United States could freeze in Los Angeles. Can't do that. But not only was the demand a surprise, the demand was made very, very public. And it was put out, and the president was quoted saying, "I'm going to put daylight between Israel and the United States." It turned out to be a problem not just for Israel, it turned out to be a problem for the Palestinians, because Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas couldn't be less Palestinian than the President of the United States. So areas in which he had previously more or less conceded to the Israelis.
How interesting.
He could, the minute the President demanded a freeze in
of
Jerusalem,
course.
Mahmoud Abbas had to demand a freeze in Jerusalem, and so the process went nowhere.
What is the reasoning behind his freeze belief? Because if Israel announces, by the way, Prime Minister Netanyahu did announce a freeze,
and
nothing happened.
It was a big debate. I write about it extensively. I myself was very ambivalent about it. I didn't like creating a precedent where we would pay the Palestinians to negotiate with us. I think it was a bad precedent. But it was either that or get into a head-on collision with the Obama administration. It was a tough choice for the Netanyahu government. He decided to give the Palestinians a 10-month moratorium of new building in the West Bank, not in Jerusalem. It did not include Jerusalem. It can't, again, by law. The Mahmoud Abbas didn't come to the negotiating table. He waited till 3 weeks before the moratorium expired, and then his demand was to extend the moratorium.
What does Abbas want?
Abbas wants Israel to go. I mean, it's a tactical decision whether in the first stage there'll be a Palestinian state living side by side. I think he's abandoned this now. I think he's learned from the international community that he can get the Palestinian state without paying a price. Mm-hmm. If you're in negotiations, you've got to pay a price. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give you something, I'm going to give something back. If he's going to have a Palestinian state, he's going to have to recognize Israel as the Jewish state, that we actually have an historic legitimacy to be there. He has to give us security. He has to give us defensible borders. But if he goes to the UN and gets a Palestinian state without having to give us anything, why would he negotiate?
Would Barack Obama acknowledge that if there were, let's say Israel unilaterally withdrew tomorrow, okay, you know what, we're sick of all of this, bye-bye, we're leaving the West Bank. Mm-hmm. And would in his view that mean a demilitarized Palestinian state, or he would even allow it to have its own army and porous borders?
Well, theoretically we're talking about a demilitarized Palestinian state that would have sort of a police force.
When you say we, you mean the Israelis.
And the United States. And
that is understood.
That was understood, but the big question was who was going to guard the border with Jordan?
Yes, that's right.
It's no small question.
Right.
We pulled out of Gaza in 2005. We pulled out of southern Lebanon in 2000. Our problem with Gaza wasn't our border, it was the Egyptian border and all the tunnels. That's where the rockets came from. Our problem with southern Lebanon wasn't our border with southern Lebanon, it was Syria's border with southern Lebanon. So our problem with the Palestinian state, should it ever come into being, wasn't going to be our border, it was going to be Jordan's border, Syrian border. Who's going to guard that border?
And what is the answer to that?
So, well, in the past, they brought an international force into Lebanon. Guess what?
Oh, please.
So you got it.
Oh, it's painful. I'm choking.
So under the watchful eye of
you mean
UN
the international
forces,
force that allowed genocide in Burundi?
Yeah, in Lebanon, under the auspices of the UN, an international force, Hezbollah went from having an arsenal of 12,000 rockets to having an arsenal of 100,000 rockets. So we can't afford that in the West Bank. Imagine 100,000.
So wait,
rockets
it is understood that a demilitarized Palestinian state would not include Israel patrolling the eastern border?
That's what Mahmoud Abbas wants. He doesn't want Israeli forces there.
Well, then, so why doesn't Israel make, not that it would matter perhaps, but why doesn't Israel make that clear?
We do. We do, and we say it's going to be there for a long time. Our margin for error here is exactly zero.
Zero.
Is zero. We won't be within rocket range, we'll be within rifle range of the West Bank. And no one's going to take that type of gamble. And the crazy thing is, Dennis, that Mahmoud Abbas knows that without the IDF there, he's a dead man. And that's the irony.
Story you told earlier, my question is, why wasn't that reported? Israel saved Abbas's life against Hamas, and it wasn't reported.
It wasn't. It doesn't report it here.
Yes.
We arrested hundreds of Hamas operatives.
Yeah, okay.
Who were going to kill him.
The book is Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide. Ambassador Michael Oren. I'm Dennis Prager. We continue. The worst part about an hour like this is that it comes to an end, because I could have a 3-hour interview with this man. Because he's not only the man who is at the vortex of American-Israeli relations as the Israeli ambassador to the United States in the bulk of the Obama era, but he's a historian before that. His book on the Six-Day War is a classic, for example. So it's just a joy, even though the topic is not filled with joy, I must say. Can you have a joyful interviewee, but the topic be not joyful? It's just philosophical silliness, but in any event. One final, there's so much to talk about, but do you believe that John Kerry and Barack Obama have I'm sorry to put it this way, a tin ear with regard to Israel's existential issue with Iran?
I believe that there are two fundamental differences between Israel and the Obama administration on Iran. And remember, Obama came out of the gate in 2009 and said, I'm going to reconcile with Iran. His senior advisor, David Axelrod, just got interviewed and said the president was thinking about this agreement with Iran from day one. So, and I more or less understood that when I assumed my post early in 2009. So the two major differences. One are purely structural. I'm going to say something borderline silly. America's a big country. It's far away from the Middle East. Americans are not threatened with national annihilation yet by the Iranians, and you have the biggest military capabilities in the world. We are a tiny nation in Israel. We are situated in Iran's backyard. They are threatening us with genocide. They're threatening to kill 8 million Israelis. And the IDF is a powerful army, but we don't have B-2 bombers. We do not have aircraft carriers. So again, our margin for error here is exactly zero. But beyond that, there are ideological and conceptual differences. The president has gone on record. He thinks the Iranian regime is rational. It's anti-Semitic, but it's rational. Operates on a cost-benefit analysis. It can be a responsible regional power. It can actually work to resolve the Shiite-Sunni divide. Talk about divides. Israel, we think they're irrational. We think they're a medieval jihadist state.
You reinforce my belief that the left lives in a make-believe world. That's what John Lennon's Imagine. That's the anthem. Michael Oren, in 10 seconds, did the Prime Minister of Israel make a mistake in coming and accepting the invitation to speak to Congress?
I think it's too early to tell. It's like the French Revolution. Let's look back on history.
Okay.
What he was absolutely right about, Dennis, was what he said.
No
and
kidding.
That this is a bad deal, and the alternative to a bad deal is not war. The alternative to a bad deal is a good deal.
I'll see you in Israel in
Thank you.
my next trip, sir. Michael Oren, The book is Ally. Thank you, sir, for your service to Israel and indeed to world peace. I'm Dennis Prager.